Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Hagen-Botham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show focuses on sharing good news and powering the good in our community. Now here's your host, Andrew Bartolotta.
Welcome to the cityCURRENT Show, where we bring you uplifting stories of individuals and organizations making an impact and powering the good in our community and around the globe. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta, and today we're diving into a vital conversation on mental and behavioral health with an expert making a tremendous impact in our region. Joining us is Dr. Sarah Irby, the founder and clinical director of Irby Psychological Services. With a location nearby in South Haven, Mississippi, her multidisciplinary clinic specializes in trauma-informed ABA services for individuals with autism, as well as comprehensive mental health support for a variety of conditions, including ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Irby, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's first start by talking and sharing your journey into the field of psychology and what inspired you to launch Irby Psychological Services.
So my interest in working specifically with the autism community kind of rooted in my childhood. When I was in high school, I volunteered with a rural respite organization in northern Nevada, where I'm from. And there was a family there who had triplets who all had an autism diagnosis. And I just was fascinated by the way those boys learned and how from week to week, just seeing all the progress that they would make. We provided supports on Saturdays, so parents had an opportunity to go out and go shopping and things like that. And so when I entered college, I had this desire, like, I'm going to continue to work with this population in some sort of capacity. I didn't know at that point what exactly it would look like. So, moved to the Memphis metro area and started college, and then led me into graduate school here at the University of Memphis as well. And through school psychology, I found a way to continue to provide these types of services throughout my career. I ended up in Omaha, Nebraska for a couple of years doing my internship and my postdoctoral fellowship, and I got to continue to build on this experience and working with an early intervention clinic during my postdoc year and providing supervision as a board certified behavior analyst, as well as doing psychological evaluations. When I originally moved back to the Memphis area in 2015, I had always had a desire to work for a university-based interdisciplinary clinic that provided the breadth of services: speech, occupational therapy, psychological evaluations, where it was like a one-stop place so families could just go and be there. So I worked at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, now the Center for Developmental Disabilities. At that time, it was the Bowling Center for Developmental Disabilities, and really saw the potential of that organization. And unfortunately, that did not pan out to be able to continue to provide through lots of different reasons, but it didn't end up kind of being that one-stop shop that they could have been for families. And so I branched out into the private practice world in 2018, and I started there, and it just kind of built. And then I opened my own practice in June of 2020 in the height of the global pandemic, and thought I was a little like, this isn't going to work. What am I doing? Right. Well, I'm also then pregnant with my third child. I'm like, is this really what I should be doing? And one thing after another, it just all spiraled. And my best friend from grad school moved back, and Dr. Tara Bradley, and she and I worked together to really decrease wait times for psychological testing as much as possible. And we started prioritizing evaluations for kids under 5 to get them in as quickly. And then the next thing you know, we're adding one provider after the next provider after the next provider. And it kind of just spiraled. And we were able to build that interdisciplinary clinic that we knew this area desperately needed, so that families could come, and instead of taking their kid to one location for speech and OT and then another location for ABA, and then having to scramble for psychological evaluations every 3 years to maintain these services, they were able to just get all of those things in one place. And so we added ABA more fully in 2022, and then speech later that year. And so OT at the beginning of 2024. And so, as we grow, we keep trying to provide more services for these families.
Well, our family has definitely benefited from your team services. So thank you for that. And just being able to put a name to some of the struggles that we saw our children face and be able to find a blueprint that we can use to help manage them in a way that is great not only for the child but also for how just they see the world differently and how we can be able to set them up for success. And so I've seen that firsthand on how your team is able to do that for us. And I know for so many other families, you have a trauma informed approach to applied behavior analysis, ABA, for individuals with autism. Explain what that means and why it's so important. What sort of characteristics would a child need to benefit from ABA therapy?
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of discussion in the autism world right now about whether or not ABA is good or bad and all of that. And I think the ABA of the past definitely creates this potential high risk for trauma because it becomes very drill sergeant-y. Like, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it and you're going to comply, no questions asked. And if we think about working with children in general, that is broadly not a great idea, because we should all still maintain bodily autonomy and be able to kind of dictate when we feel comfortable doing something or when we don't feel comfortable doing something. And a big piece of trauma informed ABA is giving children like the freedom to find what motivates them, and drift towards toys that are of interest to them, activities that are of interest to them. We follow their lead, and then we provide high levels of exposure to language development. So we're just talking constantly, labeling their behavior, reading them books, teaching them routines and skills like brushing their teeth, but in a way that doesn't force them to do things that they don't feel comfortable doing, but encourages them to continue to do things, because there is a difference between choice behaviors and not choice behaviors, right? So if I tell you to stop when we're running in the parking lot, I absolutely need you to stop running in the parking lot. That's safety. So you have to listen to those commands, but you don't necessarily have to listen to other commands that don't impact your safety or well-being, right? And so a big part of trauma informed ABA is helping them tease out those different types of commands and being able to kind of respond how they want. Another part of it is that we don't minimize like any of the repetitive behaviors unless they are harming themselves or others. They can do and like STEM behaviors all they want. And we are like, that's great. That's who you are. And we're not trying to change that about you. But if you're banging your head on the concrete wall, then we are going to help you change that behavior, because that is a danger to yourself and your well being. And I think that as we move away from the ABA of old and more clinics adopt many of these practices, our hope, right, for the grander community is that we see more willingness to consider ABA as a treatment modality for kids with autism.
What are some misconceptions people may have about autism, and how can we be more empathetic to families when we do see a tantrum going on, say at a restaurant or a store?
I think that that's so hard because, anytime you hear something loud, your gut reaction is to turn right and look to see what's happening. And I think, making eye contact with a parent and smiling is really a simple way to like, I see you and I'm not judging you. I understand what you're going through. And then actually like not necessarily intervening, because a lot of times they might have been told by a provider, like, we're going to ignore this behavior and we're going to provide them with a coping skill, but we're not going to provide a lot of attention to this tantrum. And so, as an outsider, that might look like the parent is doing nothing, but sometimes the act of doing nothing is exactly what needs to happen in that situation. And by us interjecting ourselves as outsiders, we are now providing attention for a behavior that the parents have been told, hey, we're not going to provide attention for this anymore. And so just like feeling constantly judged as a parent as you're going out with your kid who's constantly throwing down or maybe intermittently throwing down, it can be really challenging. And so the kinder we are in just our facial expressions towards people, like we're not staring and gawking. We're just like, oh, quick glance. Oh, I made eye contact. Let me smile. Like a smile goes a long way. And then just kind of stepping back and then maybe like asking without words, like, hey, do you need help? Like I'm not gonna throw myself in on you, but I am trained. I could help you a little bit if you needed it. That's my go-to when I'm out in public and I see tantrums. I'm like, hey, this happens, we can roll with it and you're fine. Like ignore the haters over there. They're not helpful. They forgot what it was like to have kids.
Yes, I've experiences both sides of that when you've had someone that has been super empathetic and wanting to help and graciously, smiling or just saying, "Do you need help? You got this. You want me to, as a stranger per se, do you want me to provide some sort of input?" And then you've had some people that have said some really ugly, hurtful things, and so I think if anything, this conversation, if you don't have someone in your family that has autism or is on the wide variety of spectrum, I think just being empathetic goes a long way there. So not only do you help and support families of children with autism and other emotional um, abilities, but also mental health services and neurodevelopmental differences. In addition to autism services, your clinic provides support for ADHD, anxiety, depression, and other conditions. What trends are you seeing in mental health today, particularly in children and young adults?
That's a good question. I think that we have seen a trend in more females assigned at birth being diagnosed with autism now. They're getting it earlier, but so that also means right now we have a big trend of people in their 20s and 30s who were not initially diagnosed because, their eye contact was too awesome, right? So like, "But you make great eye contact. You can't have autism." And so now that we're realizing that a single symptom does not equate an overarching diagnosis, or condition, that we are seeing an increase in these people in that age bracket coming in for services. I also have noticed that there aren't a lot of us providers out there who are willing to evaluate adults for autism for an initial diagnosis, which can be really challenging for people. And so we do offer that. And I think as far as after the diagnosis, we do have a lot of therapists on staff who then help kind of process that. And a lot of the anxiety and depression that we're seeing is really usually due to undiagnosed autism, undiagnosed ADHD, and living your whole life without this awareness of like, why is it so difficult for me to focus in on this lecture or complete my work as quickly as my peers? And so then it develops into anxiety, which then develops into depression. And so by recognizing it and then providing them with support, a lot of times we can see some of those symptoms alleviate with time. And then the other big trends I feel like we've noticed, I mean, that's the big one, autism being delayed for certain populations, but there has been an just a general increase in addictive type behaviors, especially associated with like screens, and social media access, but all things possible from a screen, and just really encouraging parents to recognize that although a screen is really easy to parent through, it actually is increasing a lot of anxiety and depression as we enter adolescence. And so by minimizing small screen access, so the in your face screen access, is important. So minimizing access to phones and tablets and really putting a lot of monitors on that. Those are, I probably would argue, those are probably the two biggest trends or biggest underarching issues that we get into.
Yes, as a father of three toddlers in our circle, we've noticed a lot of some tech tantrums per se when it comes to not having access to those small screens, and even some of our friends limiting the access to it, and then seeing a drastic improvement just on behavior from that small change. And so, or even the type of content that they're watching as well, and the addictive behaviors and the changing of the screens and the colors and the music and I mean, that is an entirely different radio show interview, but it is
Right.
fascinating when you look at the research there too. And so minimizing that access that then can increase your behavioral health years down the road seems like a no-brainer, but there's a process to that. And so being able to start that process, I think, is super important for the overall community. And one of your focuses is ensuring adequate access to mental health services. What systemic challenges do you see in the mental health field? What solutions would you like to see?
I think one challenge that's been there, right, has always been the stigma associated with that. But with this current generation, these younger generations coming in, millennials and Gen Z tend to be a little more open about seeking out mental health services. So I think that trend is going in the right direction. Other challenges I see are uh, like the cost aspect of it. So if you don't have Medicaid to cover any additional copays or coinsurance, commercial insurance still a lot of times is going to require you to pay a copay or a coinsurance. And that can be really hefty. In fact, sometimes more expensive than the self-pay rate for organizations. And so just being able to, one, maybe find a provider who accesses your insurance and bills it for you, or two, being able to afford your coinsurance or your copay on a regular basis. That has been the biggest one. And then we have, I'd say about 50 to 60%, if not higher, have Medicaid at our organization. And the other piece that goes with that is sometimes transportation, consistent transportation to get to appointments. So the pandemic helped access that a little bit better by providing more access to telehealth service options when appropriate, though there's still some things you can't do via telehealth, like a psychological evaluation, at least for Medicaid.
Mhm.
So I think payment access, getting here, technology access, like being savvy enough to be able to complete your new patient paperwork before an appointment, or being able to have trying to think, the internet to get it loaded and things like that. Those have been a big one. So.
What exciting new initiatives or expansions are on the horizon for Irby Psychological Services?
Oh, that's a good one. So, right now, we have been focusing a lot of our efforts on access outside of just DeSoto County and then the Memphis metro. And so, we have a clinic in Clarksdale, and we hope to continue to expand services down there and provide more mental health services in that space. Right now, we offer ABA, speech and OT there, and we do some psych evals there on a rotating basis, but being able to provide counseling and other types of services in-house, local, so people don't have to feel like they have to drive an hour and a half if they don't think that telehealth is appropriate for them or their child. So that's one thing. We've been actively hiring or searching for a physical therapist. We would absolutely love to like round out our pediatric team with speech OT and PT. Pediatric physical therapists are unicorns, and so they are really hard to find. And that would be one thing we would love to see added in the next 6 to 12 months if we can find one. And other things that we are dabbling in, one thing is considering other types of like group therapy. So, like mom and me toddler program. So, teaching moms of toddlers who are on wait lists for ABA, like how to do ABA themselves a little bit and how to implement some of that with parents present. And so, think of like a mommy and me group. And then it provides support for the parents because they're meeting other parents like them. That's one thing we would like to add. And then Becky Kane, one of our BCBAs, she's our lead BCBA here. She and I have a long 5 years or more down the road type of plan of putting in a preschool program specifically for autistic kids. And so one of the challenges with ABA therapy is that ethically, I think we shouldn't bill more than 25 hours a week of ABA. But then that leaves parents in a pickle if they're trying to work a full-time job, because that's 5 hours a day. And who's going to pick them up in the middle of the day? And then where do I take them afterwards when their behaviors prevent them from accessing a mainstream preschool program? And the special ed program in DeSoto County is only 3 hours a day, up to 4 days a week. And so all of those types of things. And so by providing it in a school format, we can bill ABA, and then we can do before and after care costs associated with that at a reasonable rate. But that way they can have full day coverage of support. And so a parent doesn't have to feel like, how am I supposed to get there at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon? I'm at work. And so that's a big dream. And hopefully one day we can see it come to fruition. But little dream right now is a physical therapist. Big dream preschool for all, kind of like pre-K3 till age like 5 or 6.
Awesome. Well, let's make those little dreams and big dreams come to reality. I'd love to see that as well. And I think that would be so beneficial for our community. What finally, before we talk about where we can learn more about Irby Psychological Services and contact you, what message would you like to leave with our listeners about the importance of mental health care and how they can take action in their own lives or communities?
So I think when you start to recognize some little warning signs, that is the best time to seek support. It is a lot easier to make change before we have really big patterned behaviors. That's true for kids, that's true for adults. But the earlier we seek services rather than waiting for it to snowball into a problem that you feel like is big enough, that is the first step. And so no problem is too small. Like, I have consulted with parents on helping them learn how to toilet train their child, or work on accepting new foods, or helping with sleep. And so we help with all different things. It's not, and those things feed into our mental health later on down the road, but it's not just like, oh, my child is anxious or my child is depressed, but like, my child isn't eating a lot of foods. My child doesn't fall asleep easily at night. My child won't go to the bathroom in public. So we help with all sorts of challenges that people face. And no problem is too small. No problem is generally too big. But sometimes we're not the appropriate placement for that if they get too big.
Someone wants to reach out to you and your team. Where do they go to learn more?
So we have our website, www.irbypsychservices.net, and you can add yourself to any of our wait lists from our website. It's pretty easy. We try to make it as user-friendly as possible, because a lot of people, if you're like me, you think about it at 6 p.m. that I need to add my kid to a wait list, not at 3 p.m. when people are actually open and accepting phone calls. So you can do that at any time of day. And then we also have Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can search us at Irby Psych, and we provide a lot of helpful information in terms of like mental health supports, things about ABA. You can learn all about the programs and services we provide there, see pictures of all of our happy, smiling clients, and know that we're doing great work every day.
Well, Dr. Irby, you are doing great work every day. It's inspiring to see how you're expanding access to mental health care, supporting individuals with autism and neurodevelopmental differences, and training the next generation of professionals. Dr. Irby, thank you so much for powering the good in our community and for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.